Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be joining you in Athens, right? We're going to pretend that we're looking at the Mediterranean Sea and we're having a nice glass of ouzo, because the sort of things we're going to talk about this morning certainly can use some ouzo. Delighted to be with you. I'm joining you out of Lausanne, and we'll be talking about how you lead through paralyzing uncertainty. All right, and to do this, let's go back. Let's go back a few years, and in fact, let's go back to May 1944. So Nazi Germany is controlling all of Europe, and the Allies have been mounting forces in England. Both sides know that an invasion is coming, but on the side of the Germans, they just don't know where. They're strongly suspecting that the Allies will invade next to Calais, where the English Channel is the narrowest, and also where actually they have evidence of their own that the Allies have been mounting forces. But they also need to concentrate on being able to fight back an invasion that might be as far back or as far out as the Cotentin Peninsula, and for that matter, anywhere in between. So they're facing that big uncertainty. A storm is coming, we just don't know where. And the complicating issue is that with the forces that they are committing on the Eastern Front, they just can't afford to be defending the entire French coasts to the level that they think they'll need. So what do? Well, they install a number of fixed fortifications throughout all along the coast, and they decide, fine, we'll have some reserve tank divisions, panzer divisions, in the back that we can dispatch towards one side or another, depending on where the Allies hit us. So this is a very agile way of thinking, right? I don't have enough forces to answer all sorts of issues that might be coming my way. So I am putting some of them in a static way, and then I'm hedging my bets by having forces I can dispatch when they're needed. Okay, so then what happens? The night of June 5th, local commanders in Normandy are reporting they're hearing lots of planes, and so they're reporting back to German High Command saying, I think the invasion is coming, please dispatch reserve troops. And High Command says, nah, probably just bombing. Let's not worry about it. A few hours later, still late on June 5th, early on June 6th, local commanders again are reporting paratroopers arriving in Normandy. And again, German High Command is saying, probably nothing, don't worry about it. We're now early hours on June 6th. German commanders are reporting seeing the invasion forces along the peninsula in the Cotentin, and still the High Command is saying, we don't know it is the real invasion. For all we know, it's a decoy. If we commit our reserve troops here, when the real invasion arrives in northern France, in Calais, we won't be able to fight it back. Therefore, we hold back. And in fact, even after the invasion has started, they refuse to dispatch the reserves, thinking we're not quite sure what's going on. By the time they release the forces, we're now well into June 6th, and the Allies have a beachfront hold in Normandy, And by the time really the Germans say, okay, this might be the real thing, days, sometimes weeks have elapsed. And during that time, these forces were not useful to push back the Allies that continue to strengthen their presence in Western France, and eventually will use this as a springboard to go on and liberate all of Western Europe. So what happened there? What happened is that German High Command wasn't sure what to think of this invasion in Normandy. Is this a real thing, or is this a decoy? And not knowing what they were facing, they said, we wait, we do not commit. We gather more evidence, and then we make up our mind. Of course, by the time they gathered enough evidence, they had enough certainty, it was too late. Luckily, it was too late. What they were facing in 1944 is what all of us are facing as managers, as executives. We need to make decisions under uncertainty. And most of the time, we're okay with it. Uncertainty is controllable. And we have fairly good ways of addressing it. But every now and then, uncertainty will skyrocket, go through the roof. And the question I want to ask today is, what do you do under extreme uncertainty? What we're going to talk about today in the next 50 minutes is a three-step approach to dealing with that extreme uncertainty. We'll look at how you can do a better job by first defining various types of futures that might be heading your way. Second, how you prepare for these futures. And third, how you move forward and how you adapt as new evidence is arriving. So to start with, let's look at how we define the future. And let's put you in a driving seat here. We have the chat, so let's use the chat function here. Just imagine for a second, you're the CEO of an airline. So let's use the number of passengers that you transported a year ago as a baseline. So let's give that a score of 100. We are now what? Maybe at 30% of what we did last year? My question to you is, can you put in a chat, just guess, how many passengers you expect you'll be transporting a year from today? So just take a guess, put that into the chat, please. So we're seeing 60, 65, 50, 30, 45, 0. Wow, Richard. Okay, you're quite the optimist there. As low as 5, as high as 100. Okay, so everyone has an opinion. And really, who knows? Who has the answer? But the point here, what we've done is something really simple. We've identified a worst case scenario that might be at, say, lower estimates, maybe around what, 25%? And the best case scenario that might be maybe around what, 80%, right? So what we've done is that we've bookended the future. We said, fine, there's a worst case scenario at 25, the best case scenario at, let's say, 75. Future will be somewhere in there. Now, of course, you know that the future will be at a discrete point in that range, but you don't know where in that range it is. So how do you figure this out? How do you help yourself? How do you understand better whether you're going to be towards a worst case scenario or towards a best case scenario? Well, one way to do this is to look and monitor the forces that you think will be relevant in shaping the future between now and the time horizon we chose, 12 months. You don't have to choose 12 months, right? You can go with 6 months, you can go with 2 years, but 12 months, let's say. So if we are driving that airline, chances are that our future is very much COVID dependent. And we might be looking at the type of forces that are associated with COVID. So you might have the longevity of the virus. And you're thinking, if infections and death continue for over a year, if we continue to have isolation policies in place, that would drive me towards the worst case. That would really impede more traffic, more traveling, people will stay in place. On the other hand, if we can dissipate the virus quickly and if we can lift isolation policies, then this might drive me towards the better range, the best case, maybe the 75%. So virus longevity might be one driving force. Another one might be the global mindset, where again, the worst case scenario is we continue to, we as countries continue to respond independently. So we tighten the borders and we distrust China and Russia and possibly the US, and EU will have all sorts of fragmented responses. Whereas if somehow countries can get their act together, if maybe the UN can orchestrate a response, then this will go towards supporting travel. A third possible force might be digital adoption. And again, if video conferencing remains a mainstream, if you guys find that listening to some dude in Lausanne is almost as good as listening to them in Athens, maybe saying, actually, why go and spend 3 days in a conference when I can have just as much value doing this online? Or equally likely, why go and get a vacation away when we have beautiful things to see in England? If that's the case, again, we'll be towards a worst case scenario from the point of view of the airline. Whereas if people say, after so many months of COVID, I've had it with staying home, I'm ready for resuming business travel, that would help push forward towards the best case. And these forces, by the way, I've stolen from my colleague and good friend, Michael Wade. These forces are very much driving uncertainty when it comes to COVID. But maybe you're in a business that's not so impacted by COVID. Or in fact, maybe you're in a business that is not impacted in the same way as COVID. So you might be looking at other forces. And we have a little exercise here at IMD called Global Signals, where we've identified a number of forces. And I haven't cited all of them here, but that's certainly some exercise we can go together where essentially we go with an organization and we help them realize what forces are particularly salient to them. So it might be political forces such as rising inequality and the crisis of Western democracy. It might be environmental forces, access to water and accelerating global climate change. It might be social, technological, or economic forces. So a number of forces are acting on the future here and pushing your future towards one extreme of the spectrum or another. Now, the key here is not to have an exhaustive list of forces, but rather to really identify the 2 or 3 that you think are the most relevant, have the biggest impact on your business, right? It's the old saying by statistician George Box, all models are wrong, but some models are useful. And really, when it comes to modeling, says, if I consider all the forces out there, it's just way too complex, it's really difficult to monitor. Instead, can I get, by focusing on 2 or 3 forces, can I get to the 80-20 to focus on what really is driving the future for my organization? All right, so what have we done so far? We've done 2 things when it comes to defining the future. We said, All right, let's identify a range within which our future will be, from the worst case to a best case. We've bookended the future. And then we've identified the drivers, the forces that will shape the future, will take it towards one extreme or another. Next, you need to prepare for the future. So again, let's have that conversation through the chat. Let's imagine we're back. We have the CEO of that airline. And let's assume that a year from today, the worst case scenario materializes. So COVID is still raging. People are not traveling. We are transporting maybe 20% of the people we were transporting a year ago. What would be success? Let's brainstorm again in the chat box. What would you call success under that perfect storm? So I see people typing. So Neil, you're saying diversify to other business areas. Almost. But what would be that's a plan to get there. We'll get there in a minute. But what would be the goal? What would you do? What would you aspire to? So Linda, again, you guys are already one step ahead, which is great. But you're changing a business model. Yes. To what end? Survival and reinforcing. Nigel, you say. Phil, you're saying business remains sustainable. I agree. You're having that worst case scenario that's hitting you straight. Maybe, just maybe, success is, we live to fight another day. We avoid bankruptcy. Maybe we'll be a shadow where we were, just a skeleton, but we're still there and we're still able to respond when things get better, right? The point I'm trying to make with this slide is that even in the worst case scenario, even if you are in those dire straits, you're only transporting 25% of the people you used to transport. You can still find success. Those are not mutually exclusive. Granted, it's not going to be a very sexy definition of success, but there is a way to be successful there. Next, you can be thinking about, okay, what would it take then? We want to avoid bankruptcy a year from today, knowing that we'll have very low revenues. What would be ideas? How do we get there? And already we had a couple of people replying and say, you diversify the business model, you maybe change into a more profitable, sustainable business, absolutely right on. Maybe my success plan will be, I'll do three things. First, I'm going to reduce my operating costs by so many percent. And I will find a line of credit of so many billion pounds. And I will find an alternative revenue source of so many billion pounds per year, so that long term, I can be back to a sustainable business. So having identified what would take for you to be successful a year from today, you can now scale it back and say, right, okay, so if I need these three things to be in position 12 months from today, what do I need to have in position 9 months from today? Maybe I need to have finalized my loans and do other things. And 6 months from today, maybe I need to have secured my collaterals. And 3 months from today, I need to have initiated negotiations with lenders so that it's all lined up, right? So that's a worst case scenario. We are preparing for the case where that perfect storm is hitting us. And we've identified what success looks like. We've identified what success plan we need to have in place. And we've identified a rollout time to make that happen. You could do this also with the best case scenario. And maybe success in your best case means, oof, we're going to have a huge jump of people coming because we are now servicing 30% of the people we used to service. Now we'll be transporting whatever it is, 80%. So maybe success means I'm able to service all that demand that's coming my way. And that's the case, I need to have plane capacity for so many passengers. And that means I need to have 9 months from today, I need to have such and such capacity in place, and therefore 6 months from today, I need to have whatever in place, and therefore 3 months from today. You get the picture, right? The point here is now we've identified a continuum of possible futures, and we've identified a success plan for each of those. Clearly, we just did this for the two extreme cases, but you could do the same for discrete scenarios in between, right? So we identify what success looks like, and we identify our success plan and our roadmap timelines. Third step then is to adapt. So again, we know that the future will be a discrete point in this range. We just don't know where it is, where it would be in the range. How do you prepare for this? Well, let's step back a little bit. This is the part where face-to-face I get pelted with rotten tomatoes because I'm going to say a bad word. It's called a probability density function. So bear with me, it's not as bad as it sounds. But the point here is that if we, and by the way, I'm really glad that we're seeing each other online because, hey, no rotten tomatoes, or maybe you can try digital rotten tomatoes. But the point here is that on the top axis, we can estimate the probability. And you're saying 12 months out, I have just no visibility of where my future will be. I've identified, sure, a worst case scenario at 20%, a best case scenario at 80%, but where the future will be over there, I have no clue. I am monitoring my forces, however. On the virus longevity, I might know that COVID cases trends vary widely by country, and in fact, are trending back up. On the global mindset, I know that countries are not really good at coordinating on opening borders and orchestrating better responses. And then on digital adoption, I can see that people are still confined to regional travel. So this bears not so well for my future prospects, but I can't place it. 3 months from today, though, chances are these forces will have evolved. And with that evolution, I will have a better understanding of where the future might lie, right? So monitoring, let's assume that the EU COVID cases will decrease and the EU borders will reopen and that some business travel resumes. This helps me realize that that area, that probability I had that was pretty much continuous from worst case to best case is now not equally the same. This tells me that chances are the best case scenario is not going to materialize. That's the bad side. I guess the good news is that the worst case, the extreme worst case, is probably not going to materialize either. Maybe the future looks like it's along that neighborhood. And then again, 6 months from today, you monitor some more, you find out new evidence, and that new evidence helps you to get narrower and narrower of where the future will be until you really shrink that time horizon. And then just a few days before 12 months from today, you'll have a pretty clear idea of where the future lies, right? So all we're doing here is just concentrating that distribution into something that increasingly is getting more likely. Now, this is where the future will be. You also need to think about how you're going to respond to this. And not knowing where the future will be 12 months out, you really need to be prepared for all scenarios. So you have your success plans, you've developed it, and really you are rolling them out so that you can be ready for whatever comes your way 12 months from today. Fast forward 3 months from today, you'll have a better idea where the future will be, and you'll be saying, right, I do not need to be prepared for the extreme worst case here, that little bit in red, or for anything that's really very close to the best case. So I can discontinue rolling out success plans that correspond to these versions of the future. And again, as you're getting closer and closer to your time horizon, you have more certainty on what the future will look like, and you can discontinue all those success plans at the extremes that are becoming useless or not nearly as useful for versions of the future that are not as likely. Now, if we knew what the future was a year from today, we could devise a success plan that's ideal, a success plan that's exactly positioned to answer this very specific version of the future, and that is not too broad. It might be that we're not there. It might be that we come up with something that looks perhaps just like this, and that's okay. That's manageable, or at least that's certainly more manageable than preparing for the best case scenario when something closer to the worst case will happen. So the point I'm making here is that under extreme uncertainty, we can't try to squeeze in the last bits of efficiency in our models, but rather we need to reopen. And under extreme uncertainty, we need to really try to reduce that distance between the ideal plan and the one that we're rolling out. How do we do this? Well, let's look at types of rollout of success plans. An efficient one, an efficient success plan is one that's not a wider as it needs to be. It's as narrow as possible. An effective plan, is one that is really covering that version of the future that that you need to have covered. A plan that's both efficient and effective is the one that is both appropriate size and appropriate location. But here's the deal. 12 months out, you have no idea that the future will be in this neighborhood. And therefore, you need to let go of being efficient and you need to go back to the drawing board, being effective. First, identifying what needs to be done. And this is, again, the shift between managing uncertainty the way we do it as managers on a day-to-day basis, when uncertainty is at the lower level. Our job, what we're calibrated to do, is really squeeze out more and more efficiency, do more with less. However, when the uncertainty, shoots through the roof, you need to go back to the drawing board and saying, first, I need to make sure that I'm doing what's needed so that whatever comes my way, I'm prepared for it. What that means is first you need to be effective, and only once you have a better idea of what the future looks like, you can become more and more efficient. Now, there are various ways to do this, and one of those is really to think about your design, how you design your success plans so that early actions really are applicable to more than one version of the future. Ideally, you design those success plans so that those early decisions can be changed, reversed, or reapplicable, and only when you get closer to your time horizon do you commit, right? And this goes back to a wonderful saying by Bezos, and think what you want about Jeff Bezos. I have my own thoughts on him, but one of the beautiful things he said is, think of your decisions as belonging to one of two categories. You have the one-way door decisions and the two-way doors decisions. The one-way doors are the decisions that once you've made, they're really hard to undo. You decide to build that plant in China, and it's going to be complicated to then move it to India, right? One-way door. However, you also have a bunch of decisions that are two-way doors that with just a little bit of work, you can adapt, you can change, you can reapply to something else. And the point here is early on, when uncertainty is really at the maximum, try to pack your success plans with as much of these two-way door decisions as you can. All right, so let's step back. Let's see what we've covered. First, we said we need to define the future, and that means bookend what future may come your way by identifying your range from the worst case to best case. We've also said take a look at the relevant forces that are shaping the future for your organization. Next, we have said we need to prepare for the future, and therefore we need to identify what success will look like along that range. What success if the perfect storm is hitting me? Success if I'm in heaven? And then devise a success plan for each of those. And finally, we said we need to adapt. We need to update our thinking in light of new evidence. When new information arises that helps me reduce my uncertainty, I can have a better view of where the future will be. And I need to roll out the success plans that will be most appropriate for this, starting with being more effective and only then moving to being more efficient. So at this stage, I'd like to get your reactions and get an understanding of where the group is standing. So Simon, could you help me with releasing a poll, please? I'd like everyone to individually take a minute and go think through these 6 activities here. Identify, please, which activity you think would be most relevant or most useful if you started doing that in your organization. Okay, and we start seeing some responses coming in here. So I'll just give you a minute. All right, and so Simon, maybe at some point we could take a screenshot because I only see the top 4, so I'm not quite sure what happens with the polls on 5 and 6. All right, so it's a little lower. Thank you. So if we go back up, really, I'm getting a sense that that in this group, at least, that idea of thinking of the future as not just this one point, discrete one point at the time horizon, but rather a range might be most relevant. So what we'll do now is we'll break out into small groups. So back at your table for not very long, just about 5 minutes, but please share some of your insights. What are you getting out of this? Identify the so what of how this can help you. And then we'll reconvene. So it's now 11:40. So let's just spend 5 minutes on this, and we'll reconvene at 11:45 for questions and perhaps some of those insights that you've derived in your groups. Okay, so see you in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone, or almost everybody. We now have a few questions. and that was fun.
Loads of questions for you there.
Okay.
But first thing is, it just strikes me that decisions are made at all levels of organizations. And you talked about adaptable organizations. And I guess to be adaptable, you have to have a certain fluidity of decision making.
Yeah. So the short answer is make decisions as low in the organization as you can, right? And this is taken from the Auftragstactic that, in fact, were developed by the Germans during the Second World War. The idea of at the top, you define what needs to be done, but you really leave it to the people on the ground who know better their specific conditions to identify how to do it. Could
you therefore have to make sure that the people who are making the decisions are make them.
That's right.
How do we do that?
Well, so this is where we start as well linking with the leadership component of the conversation, where you need to have a culture in which people know they are empowered to make decisions and they are also accountable for them.
Empowerment, but you have to have the competence to make those decisions.
Yes, so you need to hire good people. Look, I don't think there is a silver bullet for this. This is really, so we go back to this notion of agility and that notion of really shaping your organization, not just to your goals, but also to your external forces. And this is where you get into positions where you need to have those lower levels in the organizations to which you can delegate. Otherwise, it's just going to be a traffic jam at the top where everything gets clogged out.
And there's a good question here from Paul Simmons. So he's asking you, what happens when your best, worst case success plans are mutually exclusive? And he quotes the example of the airline. You maintain capacity and you slash operating costs.
That's right.
How do you?
So you go back to Bezos' classifications of decisions. There are many ways we can classify their decisions. We can get back to this, but one of those is to think about reversible versus non-reversible and think, okay, now as of today, 12 months out, I need to be prepared for those two extremes. What can I do to both reduce my operating costs and also maintain an ability to ramp back up quickly? And this is where you might be rethinking how you organize. Maybe you go with more outsourcing, or you try to variabilize your costs so that there is that notion of a common denominator among the success plans that you can focus on early on.
Okay. And I guess another question is about the type of decisions that people might be asked to take in organizations. You know, some kind of categorization, either by time, by importance, by, you know, whether you can get out of that decision or whether it's a fixed decision. How would you categorize decision making?
That's a great one. Short answer is it depends. The example we typically talk about in class is, if you were to describe a roulette to somebody, how would you categorize the numbers on a roulette? So you might be saying, we go by numbers. You go odds and evens. You go by numbers that have the digit 3 in them versus all the others. You go by colors. You know, you have the red, the black, and the green. Okay, so which one should you use? And the short answer is it depends. If you're trying to explain what a roulette is to someone who can't count, a small child, going with numbers is not going to help. If you try to explain what a roulette is to someone who's colorblind, using colors, it's not going to help. So that's that notion of insightfulness. How you describe, how do you typify decisions depends on what you want to do with it. And depending on what you want to do with it, you can find better, more insightful classifications. You might go with those decisions that need to have consensus versus decisions that can be done in business lines. Or you might go with the ones that need to be taken now versus later. Again, that depends on your specific circumstances.
And another great question from Wendy Hirsch. And she's asked about decisions about people. These are some of the hardest. Can you make a few comments about that? I mean, what would be some of the rules of engagement about making decisions about people?
Yeah, that's a hard one, right? Because, by the way, I'm an engineer by training, right? I did non-linear differential equations. I did stochastic mechanics. I did all the easy stuff because, I used to joke. I used to advise PhD students and ask them, 6 months before they were due to defend their theses, and say, when do you start writing? And they say, writing, that's not rocket science. And then it dawned on me, that's right. Writing is not rocket science. In ways, it's more complex than rocket science, because in rocket science, you have one rule and it applies all the time. Communicating, writing is also like dealing with people. It's not one rule fits all. You need to adapt to, again, the people and adapt to their circumstances. So when it comes to Wendy, when it comes to fire and rehire, you're also dealing with emotions. You're also dealing with a number of circumstances that can impact the organization a long way out. I would try to think of these decisions that can be made in agreement with the people, because there is more than a zero-sum game somewhere. So can you find some employees who actually might be open to go on a flexible schedule because they need to spend more time at home to care for their kids who can't go to school, because they need to care for an elderly person? Can you find people who would be saying, actually, under the right circumstances, I will go on early retirement? Try to find these that might not be necessarily where the center of mass, where most of your people are, but that can help you nudge your way towards a better balance.
Yeah, I think that's an extremely interesting answer. But of course, the decisions you make about people don't just impact those people, they impact the wider organization. How you treat people is seen by a wider audience.
Yes. And so I hope you can have that conversation with the wider audience. I hope you can have these State of the Union periodic talk where saying, this is what we're dealing with. And these are the multiple objectives that we as an organization are going after. And this is how we're balancing them.
Okay. One other interesting word you used during the course of your presentation was adaptable organizations. I mean, are you either adaptable or you're not? Isn't it dependent on the type of business or industry you're in? And if you're not as adaptable as you want to be, what do you do about it?
So adaptable is flexible, and every now and then I go run and bike and swim and do that sort of things. And I'm not a flexible guy, but I know that I can be more flexible than I am now. So I think there's a level of adaptability that we can bring into any organization. I think it goes back again to the type of decisions and the type of circumstances you want to be adaptable for. Just as your leadership style, if you are the top of the CEO, you cannot engage everyone on every decision. You will have the same level of constraints with being adaptable. For some things, we are adaptable, and for some others, we have to say, this is the way forward.
And there's a question from good friend Nigel Borowski, and he's saying, are we judging talent on past achievements in a different context? And you can kind of paraphrase that. You know, how do we hire and develop people for today's circumstances?
Yes, love it. It goes back. So I'm a big proponent of Bayesian thinking. And Bayesian thinking comes down to one simple maxim, is update your thinking in light of new evidence. Famously embodied by Keynes' a citation over there. He said, when the facts change, I change my opinions. What do you do, sir? And I think, Nigel, you're raising a great point. We have rules, and these rules have helped us be successful under a set of circumstances where the world is a brand new place. And it might be worth reviewing those rules and identify which of those rules still belong to operating into this new world, and which others, when you say, this no longer is relevant, let's update.
I think, Arnaud, we're getting to the end, but I just wanted to make a couple of comments before we actually get there. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought here. And we don't have long enough, really, but I would really be interested in talking a little bit more about the taxonomy of decision-making, the type of decisions. I'd want to know more about decision-making behaviors. You know, what kind of behaviors should our leaders be exhibiting? And the third element, which Wendy raises, is this whole question of decision-making about and to people. I think that these are areas where I guess we've got to go away and reflect and think a bit more and maybe come back to you at some stage. But I thought that was a very enlightening session, not long enough, but very thoughtful, well delivered, nice degree of thought, nice measured delivery. So thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and best of luck to all of you. This is some storm. So, you know, so by the way, yes, if we want to continue this conversation, find me on Twitter or LinkedIn, or happy to see how we can help. Thanks again, Mike, for your help.
Thanks, Arnaud. Cheers.
Bye-bye.